Making a sequel to Twisted Metal Black seems like it should be an easy task. Fuck, they made 5 games in a row. It can't be that hard. That is, until we pulled back for a minute and you realize that Black itself was kind of a massive changing ideas that wasn't finalized until very shortly before its release. Before landing on the dark and gritty style that Twisted Metal Black would be known for, the original idea was a game called Twisted Metal Road Trip that would have been much closer to the colorful, over-the-top antics of the original titles. The only piece of info we have on this proposed idea is a single piece of concept art David Jaffe posted on Twitter, so we can only speculate. But even once the tone and direction was set, there were still plenty of changes, mostly all of them having to do with the characters and their stories, which is understandable, as Twisted Metal Black was a more narratively focused game than any other entry in the series to this point. We can start off with just the characters' designs. Now, we aren't talking about changes from concept art to final design here. We're talking about the game itself just showing the wrong character models. So, here's the character select screen again. I've already shown it to you a few times, but I bet you didn't notice anything strange about it. I'll admit I didn't at first either, until I was really searching for it. See anything strange about this image of Billy Ray? How about now? And there's more. Bloody Mary, Sweet Tooth, Agent Stone, Cage, all varying in ways great and small from their appearance in cutscenes. Now, which of these designs came first? Well, I'm pretty sure it's the... And what do I base this on? Well, only the hour of early cutscene footage that was leaked onto the internet by the Twisted Metal Alliance in 2013. This video features the game's cutscenes as little more than storyboards with placeholder voice acting from an undetermined point in the game's development. The differences range from a single line or shot to a character's entire story being changed. While the whole video is very interesting, and I very much recommend you watch it yourself, I'm not going to step on Dark Scorpius' feet here and just recap the whole video. But to give you an idea of the changes present, let's just talk about Dollface. Dollface's cutscenes are a little strange in Twisted Metal Black. In the final game, she met Mr. Creel after college, and an accidental coffee spill sent him into a rage where he trapped her in her mask. In the original story, this was not the case. Dollface was much younger and lived with her abusive father who, like Mr. Creel in the final game, was a mask maker. Dollface's mother died a year before her mask incident when, according to her father, she fell down the steps. Yeah, sure, I'd buy that. Her father would get pissed off whenever she made any kind of noise while he worked, and one day, when she accidentally dropped a glass bottle on the ground, well, I think you know what happened next. Now, this story actually makes a lot more sense, and explains a few things when you compare the two. A shitty abusive parent who snapped makes a lot more sense to me than a random business owner attacking his employee for basically no reason. In retrospect, the cutscenes themselves still clearly use the room from the beta. They just cut away before you see the young Dollface's table.
Job after college. I didn't want to screw it up.
They also use the young Dollface model, whose clothing and face fit a lot better with the idea of a young girl than a 20-something woman who's going to work. This also explains Dollface's strange manner of speaking.
I was a bad girl one time. And now I'm gonna pay for what I did forever and ever and ever.
She talks like a child, which would make sense given that in this hypothetical scenario, she would have been in Blackfield since she was a kid. When the time comes to get her wish, she also, appropriately, is much less remorseful over having to kill her dad than Mr. Creel. So I think you get the point. A lot of stuff was edited, and Twisted Metal Black was changing things rapidly behind the scenes, even as it approached release. But it did eventually release, and did so to praise and acclaim, which means another Twisted Metal should have been coming right around the corner. And it was, under the name Twisted Metal Harbor City, or Twisted Metal Black Harbor City. I've seen it written both ways. To talk about Harbor City, though, I need to explain to you what Twisted Metal Lost is. Twisted Metal Lost is a short game contained in Twisted Metal Head-On Extra Twisted Edition. This game is actually the playable remnants of Harbor City that were added as a bonus to the PS2 re-release of Head-On. It is worth noting that the weapons and controls are a reskin of Twisted Metal Head-On and are not in fact a separate new game engine. There are 4 levels present, as well as almost all the drivers from Twisted Metal Black, including a new character named Severed Sam. I can't handle these fucking games anymore. The characters still even have their summaries that give us a basic idea of what the story of Harbor City might have been. Harbor City was said to be a direct continuation of Twisted Metal Black, still taking place in the dark universe of Needle's mind. In addition to the classic Twisted Metal gameplay though, there were gonna be some big changes this go around. The first of which was the change to an open world of connected areas rather than a simple level select. This can be seen in Lost, as the levels contain highways on the outskirts of the maps that would have been used to connect the stages, though they are now obviously blocked off. The second big addition was set to be the introduction of on-foot action sections. These levels would have seen you playing as Sweet Tooth or the Preacher in what looks like GTA-style missions, where you'd have to walk around various locations, platforming and using various weapons to dispatch enemies. There is a bit left over from this gameplay style in Lost as well, under the title Sweet Tour. Sweet Tour would have been the very beginning of Harbor City, and had Sweet Tooth breaking out of Blackfield Asylum and returning to his ice cream truck. There are no enemies present, and the only thing Sweet Tooth can do are melee and jump. The jump is kind of pointless though, as there's no hit detection on the platforming obstacles in this build. With the open world structure and the on-foot missions taken into account, I think it's likely Harbor City would have had a standard overarching narrative rather than small individual character stories, though it's possible the usual get-a-wish endings would have been preserved through some sort of arcade mode or something. That's just my conjecture, of course, but it seems pretty plausible, and if it were true, would explain some of the development problems that eventually got the game cancelled. I mean, how do you combine the stories of a dozen completely unrelated separate characters who've barely interacted up to this point? Especially when, as I've said countless times, Twisted Metal is a tournament where you have to kill your opponents. And while I'm on the subject, I should explain that Twisted Metal Harbor City's biographies for each driver assumes they each won Twisted Metal and got their wish. I mean, that's kinda obvious as they're all still alive, but I suppose this would have been explained by it all being in Needle's head or some such nonsense. I'm incredibly impressed by what we've seen of this game, and am absolutely devastated that we never got the full version of it. As I've stated in numerous times at this point, the part of Twisted Metal that makes me so interested in it is its world and characters. The car combat is just a little additional bonus on top. But a Twisted Metal game with open world elements and on-foot action, sign me right the fuck up. Unfortunately, as I'm sure you've caught on by now, Twisted Metal Harbor City was never released. The reason for its cancellation, despite being so far into development, is we don't quite know. I couldn't find any official statements about the project at all. Well, that's not entirely true. The rumor for the game's cancellation that had been perpetuated for some years now is that a number of the game's high-ranking staff died in a plane crash, which resulted in Harbor City's cancellation. Now, I'm gonna tread lightly here, as I don't want to offend any potential families of the deceased, but this claim is strange. For starters, I've seen the number of deaths in the crash listed as both 5 or 7, depending on the source, and the source is never verified by an actual incident report or obituary or anything of the sort. To add to this, David Jaffe, Scott Campbell, Jeff Goldsmith, Linda Joe, Brad Aldridge, and every other top-billed member of the Twisted Metal staff I could find are still alive. And if that wasn't enough for you, there's the creepy letter that arrived at Sony headquarters, according to Twisted Metal Lost. A letter that is supposedly from the deceased team members that told them to release what was left of the game to the world. Now, no matter whether you believe this plane crash story or not, I think we can all agree that a letter written by a group of ghosts to release a beta video game is some horror movie shit that I promise you did not happen. Look, I'm sorry to rain on anyone's parade here, but it's totally fake. I know a lot of people still believe this myth for whatever reason, and I don't want to ruin the intrigue and mystery behind Twisted Metal Lost, but this story is entirely fabricated and only serves as a fun little spooky backstory for the game. Here's an excerpt from a blog post directly from David Jaffe himself on this subject, when he was falsely accused of using the story to drum up sales, despite the fact that the plane crash story was entirely confined to the game and wasn't used in any promotional materials. I never did what you're accusing me of doing. We never used, and I never would, a tragedy, real or fake, to promote anything. The story of the developers dying in the plane crash, totally fake, was never used to promote that game. Whatever the reasoning may have actually been for the cancellation, Harbor City was scrapped, as well as any plans for a Twisted Metal game on the PlayStation 2. The Twisted Metal team, now reorganizing and renaming themselves once again, this time to Eat, Sleep, Play, started looking towards the next-gen side of things, the PlayStation 3. Quite a few ideas were tossed around during this time. The most fleshed out of these ideas appears to be Twisted Metal Apocalypse, or Twisted Metal Armageddon. I've seen both titles floating around and I assume they refer to the same game. Apocalypse was set to be another canon reboot, this time taking place in a post-apocalyptic future a la Road Warrior. Seems like a perfect fit, doesn't it? Twisted Metal is all about demolition derby, and it being based in a world where scavengers assemble their own war machines out of spare parts would not only be appropriate, but also open up gameplay possibilities, such as customizable vehicles. The reason this project was canned is actually quite straightforward. People did try and pin this one's cancellation on the plane crash as well, but that's probably because the actual reason is boring. They just couldn't make it work right. The team didn't like the post-apocalyptic style of the game, and ideas just weren't coming, so the project was dropped. This unfortunately means we have to live in a world without skinny Mad Max Extra Sweet Tooth, and that is truly a grave injustice. While the world and tone were dropped, the gameplay aspects and some vehicle concepts, such as the Talon helicopter, would eventually evolve into the Twisted Metal PS3 reboot, which we'll be covering at a later time. The only other cancelled Twisted Metal game, at least as far as I'm aware of, was Twisted Metal Revolution. There's very little about this project other than it was going to be a hip-hop urban-inspired Twisted Metal game, featuring such characters as Sweet Tooth as a sly, suit-wearing, smooth criminal. I cannot possibly imagine why this one was cancelled. They compared the tone to Midnight Club, but I don't know about that one, Chief. In the midst of all these ideas and concepts, Eat Sleep Play would eventually decide that, for the time being, the best option was simply to return to their roots, to make a proper direct sequel to Twisted Metal 2. By the time they came to this conclusion, though, the PS2 was starting to become outdated, and the PS3 hadn't quite caught on yet, so the team went with, let's just say they decided to take their nuts outside. What? I'm forgetting something. No, I don't think so. What the fuck's a small brawl? But I had the perfect little segue where I referenced the PSP's god-fucking-awful marketing campaign about squirrel nuts. I was going to talk about Head-On next. Fine. I'll review the Rugrats or whatever the crap this is. Just give me the game. This is one of those PS1 jewel cases. We already moved on from that system. I did Twisted Metal Black last chapter. What the fuck?